What's up, gents? It's Mark with another episode of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, the show that gives you the tips and tools you need to make yourself stronger, faster, and harder to kill. Today, we're talking about small unit tactics and if they have any relevance for the in the law enforcement and particularly the civilian community. So, one thing I find is most people train to fight as individuals, but few ever learn how to fight as a team. And that's where small unit tactics come in. But are these tactics only for soldiers on the battlefield, or can they also be used for law enforcement officers and the armed civilians to give them an edge in the real world? And that's what this episode is all about. So, in this transmission, we're going to cover what small unit tactics are actually and how they developed. We're going to talk about the roles and responsibilities inside a conventional rifle squad. And that's important to do because that is the way we're going to figure out how to understand if we can apply these principles in a law enforcement context, and also how civilians can adapt the same concepts to real world defense situations and preparedness. And then we're going to look at practical ways to apply squad level principles when you're short on manpower. So whether or not you carry a badge, or you wear a badge, or you carry concealed, or you just want to understand how to move and fight as part of a group, this episode will break it down in plain language. So before we do that, I want to give a quick shout out to our premium subscribers on Substack. Really appreciate you guys helping us keep the light on. If you would like to support the show, it's very easy. You just go to our Substack page and you just click the upgrade button. Very simple. For a few bucks a month, you'll get access to all the episodes, including member-only content. Or another way you could support the show that costs you nothing is just whatever platform you're listening on, just hit us a 5-star or leave a review and tell us how much you like it, how great it is, and all that stuff. It really does help us get the word out. So without further ado, we're talking about small unit tactics, law enforcement, civilian applications. It's all on Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, and we're starting right now. Podcast still recorded live from an undisclosed location south of the Mason-Dixon line. Well, let's get into it, shall we? All right, what are small unit tactics? So at their core, small unit tactics are the coordinated actions of a team of soldiers working together towards an objective. The word tactics itself comes from the Greek taktikos, meaning arrangement. So it's how you arrange or one definition could just be how you arrange your people and equipment in relation to the threat or the enemy. So in other words, it's not just about individual skills, but it's about how individuals are arranged and coordinated for maximum effort. So when we say, quote, small unit, unquote, we're talking about the lowest level of a combat organization. So that will typically mean a squad, or even smaller than that would be fire teams. So remember, there's typically 2 fire teams in a squad. So these are the building blocks of armies, right? And military units, right? So to understand modern small tactics, we need to look at how they developed. So during World War I, combat quickly devolved into trench warfare. I think everybody knows that, right? Where you had huge armies just pounding each other with artillery and waves of infantry. But out of that meat grinder came a realization that mass formations in the modern era, running straight up against machine gun emplacements, simply didn't work, right? It just was way too much carnage, way too much loss of life. And so smaller and more agile teams were needed. So by the time we jump into World War II, this has evolved further where these realizations began to find their way out on the battlefield, right, in application. So the Germans the German army pioneered infiltration tactics, the use of small groups of soldiers working semi-independently, doing what we now call like fire and maneuver. And so the United States took these lessons and we built them into our military doctrine. So fast forward today, and to U.S. Army doctrine, at least laid out in FM's like field manuals like FM 3-21.8, and also my still favorite, although it's been upgraded, as FM 7-8, right? But the infantry, rifle, platoon, and squad, right? It is centered around squads of 9 to 12 men and fire teams of 4 to 5, right? And the heart of these tactics is simple, right? One element will provide suppressive fire while the other element maneuvers, right? That's fire movement, right? Fire maneuver. So you cover and advance. And the principle hasn't changed in 100 years because it works, right? So when we talk about small unit tactics, we're really talking about principles of coordination, communication, and movement that allows a group of people to do far more together than what they could do as an individual. So let's talk about squad composition and roles, because you have to understand how this works in the big picture and what it's trying to accomplish, so that then you can decide or figure out how you're going to take those principles and apply them, whether it's a law enforcement context or even in a civilian world, right? The principles are going to be the same, but the way that gets applied is going to look different, right? So, like I said, a typical squad has about 9 to 12 dudes, right? It's usually divided into 2 fire teams plus a squad leader. So that's 9 guys. So you're like, well, where's the 12 come from? Well, you're going to have attachments and maybe people that augment your squad. So for instance, if you have 9 people, right, 2 fire teams and a squad leader's probably going to have an RTO or radio operator. Well, now you're to 10. So throw a medic in there, maybe a forward observer or machine gun that's attached or something like that. You can see how that number can be plussed up a little bit depending on who you got riding with you. All right. So, that's kind of how let's see how these pieces fit together. So I mentioned you have the squad leader. So this is the overall leader. He's responsible for everything the squad does or doesn't do, right? He's responsible for directing the squad's actions, making tactical decisions at that level, maintaining communication with the higher command, right? So with the platoon, or the company or whatever, depending on what the squad's role is, right? And his job is to really translate the commander's intent into action on the ground, right? The team leaders, well, those are who we call they're the busiest men in show business, so to say, right? They are the guys that are executing everything that comes down from the squad leader, right? So each fire team, right, typically 4 people, are going to have a team leader, so 2 per squad. And they're typically sergeants, right? These are your E5 sergeants or corporal, or sometimes even a senior specialist might be your team leader, just depends. But they ultimately control their team's movement and fire. And then they'll pass information along from orders from the squad leader, and then make decisions in the moment for their team to execute that squad leader's intent, right? Now, you have other guys in there that have roles. So you'll typically have an automatic rifleman. So each team has an automatic rifleman carrying a squad automatic weapon like the M249 or the SAW, which just as a way of military trivia was first fielded back in the 1980s, I think either in Grenada or Panama, one of those, which I think Grenada came first. And it's been used in every theater since then. So, and we're still using it today. It's a pretty cool little device. So what they're doing is they're really responsible for, they're the kind of heavy firepower in the squad, right? And they will be laying a base of fire that allows the other people to maneuver, right? And even though they maneuver themselves, but we'll get into that. Then you have grenadiers. right? So the Grenadier, these are riflemen also. They have their M4, right, that they're carrying, but they also will carry a grenade launcher. Sometimes it can be attached to the M4, but not always. Right. And this gives the squad extra punch against dug-in enemies or light vehicles. So using a 40 millimeter launcher like the M320, right, they can hit targets up to 350 meters away. You can use explosive. They can use smoke. They can use illumination rounds. Big difference, right? And their job is to suppress and destroy enemy infantry. They can obscure enemy observation with smoke for friendly movement, and they can light up or mark positions when needed, day or night. And then you got your riflemen. This is the backbone of the squad. The rifleman carries the standard weapons like their M4. They serve as the maneuver element. They take part in flanking maneuvers, flanking the enemy, helping to clear buildings, and kind of filling gaps in wherever needed. So together, and of course, the roles, responsibilities are more nuanced than that. I'm just giving you a 30,000 foot view, right? So we can kind of look at these in the abstract. But together, these roles form a balanced team. So think of it like a machine. The squad leader directs, the team leader translates that direction into immediate action, and the automatic riflemen provide the beating heart of the firepower. And then the grenadiers will bring a versatility, and the riflemen provide mobility. So the point is, nobody is extra. Every role contributes to the squad's ability to close with and destroy the enemy in close combat by means of fire and maneuver. All right, so now that you kind of have an idea of what the plan and purpose is of the squad, right? On this level, let's look at how these tactics in this organization can be used outside the military. Because you might be thinking, okay, cool story, bro, but what does this matter if I'm not in the Army or the Marines, right? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Let's look at law enforcement first. So police officers on tactical teams like SWAT, or really even officers on patrol, right? The principles of small unit tactics are critical. So things like clearing a building, moving down a street or an alleyway, responding to an active shooter situation. This requires coordination. If everybody is just rushing forward as an individual, you get chaos, you get friendly fire, and you're not as efficient in leveraging your combat power, right, towards the threat. But when officers understand concepts like sectors of fire, bounding movement, team integrity, operations become safer and much more effective. Now, you might think that the police already know this stuff. I mean, they do get training on this, some more than others. And a lot of this depends on where you're at in America. I've been around the country. I've done a lot of law enforcement training, and your bigger metropolitan areas, guys tend to be more trained on this stuff or have some exposure to this. But your guys out in the more rural areas, less populated areas with the smaller tax base, smaller budget, they may not have much of this at all, if any. And the other problems that we've run into before is, I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase militarization of the police, right? That's kind of a bad term. People don't like it. People shy away from it. It's very controversial. And so then when you start talking military tactics to law enforcement, who some of them have not served in the military, there's a big disconnect there, and they don't understand it. That phrase militarization has been politicized, and they kind of shy away from it, and they don't really understand that, yes, this is for you. You just have to apply it differently. So you're not going to apply these tactics in the same way you would in the military, but they're very crucial and critical for you in the way you do your job, right? And we've seen there's plenty of footage that's on YouTube and LiveLeak and other places where you can show where, unfortunately, officers that don't know or haven't been exposed to this information and haven't trained it really do suffer from it. And before we just keep bashing on, I'm not bashing on them at all, because they really do come by it honestly. And one of the problems you have with law enforcement training, it's the budget. Do they have the budget for it? And number two, do they have the manpower to send people from training? And a lot of people will get critical of law enforcement officers. I mean, we've all heard the statistics of, they have a low hit rate, when they're shooting and stuff like that, not very accurate and things like that. But you have to understand from their perspective, not only is the budget the problem, they have a hard time getting the training that they need. The other thing is with the manpower, it's hard because unlike in the military where this is what we live for, this is why we exist, is to train in this kind of stuff. And so that is part of our job. That will be, time is always set aside, particularly for dudes in the combat arms, right? You're going to be in a training cycle where you are out doing this kind of stuff. But for the police, say you're a patrolman, right? You are 365 days a year, other than your days off. I mean, you're on patrol. So if they're going to send you to a training, even if they have the money for the budget to pay for the training, well, that's an officer they have to pull off the street to send, and then other officers have to pick up the slack, right? You're going to be down one or two on your patrol and stuff like that. So even just getting guys time off to go to training is a challenge for some departments as well. So it's just, they're really in a catch-22. So I think that's worth noting to put out there. That's one of their challenges. Now, for civilians are they have different challenges, right? It's true, most civilians won't be forming squads or conducting combat patrols. I mean, we hope not, right? But principles of small unit tactics can still apply. Think about neighborhood watch groups, preparedness communities, or even something as simple as defending your home with a couple of your roommates or family members, right? Knowing how to assign sectors of responsibility, prioritization of work, how to communicate under stress, and how to move or defend together can make the difference between success and failure. So even beyond the quote unquote tactical scenarios, the principles are still useful. So even hunters moving through the woods in a group could benefit from some of these concepts. Search and rescue volunteers can be adapted to utilize small unit tactics so that they can stay coordinated. So it's not always about having a gun or using it, right? It's about taking the principles of command and control, coordination, and communication, and utilizing that to help you secure and obtain your objective. So the bottom line is whether you wear a badge or not, the logic of small unit tactics, coordination, communication, mutual support, these have value far beyond the battlefield. All right, so let's talk about how we adapt these tactics for, let's say, 3 to 5 man teams, right? So here's the part that really matters for most of the listeners. Because like I said, very few of you, especially civilians, are ever going to command a 9 to 12 man squad, right? But a group of 3, that's doable. That's likely. 4, maybe even 5, right? That's realistic. So how do you adapt? So let's return to our first principles. And the first principle is fire and maneuver, right? That I have mentioned before. Just think about this. In a fire maneuver, right, or fire movement, however you want to phrase it, one element is the suppressive element while the other one moves, right? And you can do this with 3 men. It's possible. One suppresses, one maneuvers, and then the leader directs, right? And then the leader can choose which one he wants to go with as far as when he moves up as well. Another principle that you have to take into account is sectors of fire, right? Everyone is responsible for a slice of the battle space, right? And the reason why sectors of fire are important is that prevents gaps in your fire where the threat can kind of filter through unexposed, or it keeps you from running into fratricide where you're shooting and hurting your own buddies. Then the other principle is communication. It's got to be clear, it's got to be concise language or even hand signals, right? So no rambling in the middle of a fight. And then of course mutual support. It's where you position your teammates so that you can cover each other and no one is out there hanging, sucking left hand tit, so to say, right? You got people positioned so that they can help each other and no one's isolated, right? So those are the principles. Now let's look at how we would break this down into a smaller team, right? Since we assume we're not going to be working in the conventional rifle squad. All right, so let's start at the team level, right? So let's say you have a 3-man team, right? Somebody's got to be the leader, right? That has to be appointed ahead of time. So somebody who's competent enough to maintain the awareness for the whole group, right? In connection with the goals and objectives, and that can direct the action. The other one is the automatic rifleman, and which really should be called support by fire, right? So I'm just translating that term from, if I say automatic rifleman, I'm talking about support by fire, because we'll get into that because most civilians aren't going to have a belt-fed weapon, right? They're providing the base of fire, and then the rifleman maneuvers, assists, or covers. That's the bare minimum. It's not ideal, but it works. Now, if you're going to bump in, and we'll talk about scenarios and how this will play out, so just stick with me. So let's say you've plussed up and you've got a 4-man team. Well, now we've got a leader, always going to have a leader. You've got the suppressive element or the automatic rifleman role. And then you have the rifleman or assistant that supports, reloads, or maneuvers. And you've got an additional rifleman, right? This is that offers the flexibility and is often part of the main maneuver element. So essentially a fire team, that's the core building block of U.S. infantry doctrine. Now, what if you have a 5-man team, right? So you got a fire team plus, right? So leader, automatic rifleman, someone with the grenadier role. So again, civilians, you're not going to have grenades, right? But you can swap that out for someone that takes over the squad designated marksman role, right? To add flexibility. So this is someone with an M4 who may have like an augmented optic, like let's say like a LPVO or something like that can reach out to further distances, provide some overwatch, things like that. So you're just adding some flexibility with that extra man. And then you got a couple riflemen. Now you got enough bodies for a small base of fire and a maneuver element, making things a lot more versatile. So the key to understanding this all really just comes down to understanding that even small numbers can apply the same principles if the roles are clear. Now let's deal with this automatic rifleman term, right? So in doctrine, the automatic rifleman position exists because the U.S. military equips squads with light machine guns like the M249, right? The squad automatic weapon. But in the civilian world, belt feds aren't available. Even magazine-fed automatic rifles are rare, right? And tightly regulated. So the chances of you having access to one of these things legally, right, are probably not in the cards. So in a civilian or law enforcement adaptation, the terminology just shifts from the position of automatic rifleman to the function, right, which is the support by fire element, right? What really matters here is not the weapon system, but the role. And that's the support by fire role. So in other words, what the squad needs isn't necessarily a machine gun. It's someone who's being tasked, someone or some people being tasked with laying down accurate, sustained fire to keep the enemy suppressed while the other people maneuver. And it's important to understand when I talk about these roles, they're fluid. They're not fixed. So let's just take, for example, during a bounding maneuver, right? Responsibility will shift as the fight develops. So, for example, you might start out providing suppressive fire while your teammates advance on the threat. But once they reach cover and establish their positions, then the roles reverse. They begin laying down fire to keep the enemy's head down while you and maybe your other teammate or however you're arranged, then you move forward. So this leapfrogging continues with each element alternating between suppression and movement until the team closes in and can finish the fight. And of course, I'm going to be remiss. I got to put the disclaimer out there. These techniques that I'm talking about in this episode include bounding, support by fire drills, coordinated movement under stress. These are advanced tactical skills. So we're just discussing these here for educational purposes only. And you should not attempt these without making sure you have proper instruction, supervision, and some strict safety precautions. So always seek out qualified, professional training and ensure that any practice is conducted in a safe, legal environment. So I'm just giving you an overview of how this works. I'm not telling folks how to do it or encouraging you to do it. This is just a primer on how it works. You seek out the professional training that can help you implement it and do it live, right? If that's something you want to pursue. So let's talk about practical applications in training. So how do you actually train this? Well, number one, simplicity is the key. Start simple and don't overcomplicate it. Practice bounding where one person lays down suppressive fire while the other one moves forward, and then you rotate and repeat and get smooth at it. So train. You can do this. You don't even need rounds to do this, but if you want something, some type of stimulus, right? You can use simulated fire. You can use, I think you can buy blanks on the civilian market. I'm pretty sure you can with a BFA adapter to your AR-15. That's one way to do it. That's going to be a little bit more expensive. I think the more economical way would be airsoft. You can do it that way. But like I said, don't do live fire without the supervision of a qualified professional instructor, right? Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble with this stuff, right? Second is practicing communication. So you agree in advance of what those commands, how you're going to communicate it, what the orders are, and things like that. So you agree on clear, short commands. Using hand signals, right? That's going to come into key, particularly as you're moving into position, because there are times where, excuse me, say you're bound in Overwatch, right? Where you haven't made contact yet, but you think contact is likely. So you're not even firing a shot. You don't want to fire a shot. You're not sure where the threat is or if the threat's even there. You just think that you're in a spot where it's likely. And so then you might choose to do a bounding Overwatch, which is just one team stays in place overlooking the avenue of approach, right? And then the other group bumps up, they set in place, and then they provide cover while the other element moves up. So who covers, who moves, who leads, you drill that until it's second nature. And then fourth, make sure you're rotating roles out. Don't let one guy always be the leader, right? In the training environment, or always be at the base of fire. Everybody should know how to step into that position in case someone goes down. And then finally, as you get the mechanics down and you understand the coordination, communication, that kind of stuff, then you can start introducing a little stress and a little realism. So you can train under physical stress. You can do some push-ups, do some sprints. You can introduce or train in some low light conditions, right? That gives you a different look, or utilizing loud noise. And those are all viable options. So loud noises, really? Yes, really. Years ago, I'll just give you, for instance, years ago, I was in Israel training with some IDF guys, and they had there on the range, they had a whole range set up to mimic a Middle Eastern marketplace. So the range was equipped with these loud speakers that would blare out kind of like a soundtrack of a busy, bustling crowd. All right. And then at the point that there was a sound of a machine gun going off, and then blood-curdling screams rang out over the loudspeakers, and it was deafening. And when you heard the sound of gunfire and all the screaming and stuff, that was your cue to move into the mock-up marketplace. And then from there, you would start engaging bad guys. And then they had friendly targets, right, simulated out there. So you'd have to differentiate between, the good guys and bad guys, and engage only the bad guys. And that one would really get your heart rate going. It was really cool. It was a good experience. So stuff like that. You just get creative and have fun with it, and just be safe. That's the main thing, right? Nobody's going to learn anything if they get hurt, right? So make sure that you were doing this very safely. But let's wrap it up. So small unit tactics aren't just about soldiers with rifles. They're about human beings learning how to move, how to fight, and how to survive together. So at their heart, they're really about teamwork, really about discipline and communication. That's really the main thing in your training you should be taking, that should be the takeaway. So for the soldier, it's doctrine. For the police officer, these can be life-saving skills. And for the civilians, they're principles for organization that can be scaled down and applied with just a few trusted people. So you don't have to have a 12-man squad to start applying these lessons. You just need a small group of guys with clear roles who are committed to train. So whether you're a cop or a civilian, or just someone who's interested in this warrior's path, remember, the difference between a fighter and a team that fights really comes down to the combination and coordination of power. That's what small unit tactics will give you. All right, guys. If you're digging this transmission, share this with a buddy. Keep the conversation going. If you have any questions, just feel free to email me. I'll put a link in the show notes below. Hit me up with any questions, comments, and new topics, anything like that. So, guys, I appreciate it, and I'm signing off saying this is Mark. Stay safe, stay sharp, and keep it Pearl Snap.